Is a gas power.
This is Gail Morgan welcoming you to the Libertarian Counterpoint. Now, your host, James Just.
Thank you for joining us and welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. With me today is Richard Fields in the middle, John Cameron down on the other end. And gentlemen, we have a disturbing report came out a couple weeks ago that democracy is deteriorating worldwide among the pandemic. All these authoritarian measures taken to supposedly control, the disease that can't be named, shall we say? The fact that we have to have that kind, use euphemisms to discuss this thing is part of actually the problem. It's a very visible and audible this sign that this problem of democracy, freedom, individual rights to speak freely has deteriorated worldwide, and it's only getting worse. And the thing is, we don't seem to be dealing with the Voldemort problem very well.
Yeah, I think we need to distinguish between democracy and liberty or freedom. Democracy is probably the somebody said, I forget who, it's the best form of government or the worst form of government except for all the rest. Democracy in and of itself is no panacea, because it's essentially two wolves and a sheep voting on who's going to be breakfast. But it's better than the wolf being in charge, which is the direction that we're going, which is authoritarians, very straight and simple. Not majority authoritarianism, but oligarchic or individual authoritarians. And right now we're looking at a medical authoritarian regime, in effect. And it has not been, looking at the evidence, we still have people getting sick from the disease that cannot be named, even though the people who are in charge have been just locking down and masking up and doing all kinds of things without respite for the last almost 2 years now. And that's the problem. The problem is that we have allowed medical practitioners to look only at medical results and totally ignore the side effects, the unintended consequences, or perhaps the intended consequences of what lockdowns can and would and have in fact done, which is essentially, destroy big swaths of the economy, not to mention people's mental health. So we are bowing to a medical aristocracy, whether we know it or not, and that's, I think, what's reflected in the statistics on that you referenced.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with a lot of that. I know we can't talk about the Comic-Con disease. I wish I would have sent that. I wish I would have sent everybody an article. But a Yale epidemiologist had a nice thing to say about minor bureaucrats having major power. And that's what we're seeing here. We're in the States, and I think it did. Richard, correct me if I'm wrong. I know you will. The independent regulatory agencies started when, in the 70s?
No, they started FDR at least.
Yeah. But the great proliferation was a little bit later.
In Great Society, that was a big proliferation, yeah.
And so
actually, in the Nixon years, as far as EPA and that sort of thing.
One more time, Nixon years.
The Nixon years is when we saw EPA and some of those organizations begin.
And then now we've had the FDA for a while, but the FDA was kind of a major organization that just got in the way of stuff, but didn't try to actually do anything other than prevent new drugs and new devices to come to market to protect people who already had the old devices and were selling them, whether they're good or bad. And then they stepped into right before the pandemic, they stepped in and decided to do something about the opioid crisis, and decided that they had the power to do that. And basically through their actions, if it hadn't been for the pandemic, that's what we'd be talking about. So you have all these minor bureaucrats in these government agencies not only do you have the big boys in the halls of Congress and the imperial presidents that we have in other countries, you have the same thing with the bummer is they don't have a written constitution in a lot of countries that were seen as very free. And so, like in Australia, everybody said, "Oh, Australia is a great place to live." Yeah, until they started having troops knock on people's doors to check on them, and they had no, constitutional rights. So, our constitutional rights are being assaulted and trampled on in the name of I don't know what. Because, as you pointed out, Richard, all the things that the powers that we let be have done haven't prevented what they said they were going to prevent by doing those activities that have horrible consequences to mental health, economy, children's education, and all the rest of that. So, and I think that trend was there even before the pandemic, but the pandemic, gave people a license to assume power they didn't have and march people about. So I don't really know, what to do about it, because even if you vote out the current ship of fools and another ship of fools docks in port, the bureaucrats that have the boots on the street, excuse me, will still be in essence in power. So I don't quite frankly know what we can do other than be aware of it.
Yeah, there was a drug that essentially was the caused birth defects back in the 1950s and before. It was thalidomide. I just had to look it up. I couldn't remember what the name of the drug was, but it was thalidomide caused birth defects, and it was a side effect of a drug that was otherwise useful, but not very useful or not very advisable obviously for pregnant women. And because of that scare, a very legitimate scare, the FDA, that was one of the reasons the FDA was formed. And ever since its formation, up until recently, the role of the FDA was essentially to prevent another thalidomide, prevent any unforeseen side effects of a difficult or otherwise beneficial drug. And interestingly enough, the last couple of years, since the Trump, and I emphasize the Trump vaccine, Trump was the guy that said we have to have a vaccine pronto. And ever since the Trump vaccines were introduced or manufactured or invented, let's put it that way, by Pfizer and Moderna and so forth, the FDA has done a 180. They're now saying we will not go through the extensive testing to see if there are unforeseen bad side effects. We're just going to approve this thing and move on. So it's an interesting turn in policy, and it's been done at the bureaucratic level. There was no act of Congress that changed anything. There may have been an executive order, but it was done certainly outside of the legislative process.
And these independent regulatory agencies pick and choose too. I mean, recently we talked on the show about the FDA deciding to, after years of fighting vaping, they looked at numbers from around the world and made the wise decision to say that vaping tobacco might be a way to save about 1 million lives a year from the effects of smoking if everybody switched from smoking to vaping, and a way to quit smoking. And they'd been hands off, and then they decided they could regulate everything. And this wasn't through an act of Congress. This was an internal decision made by an independent regulatory agency to choose to take control of a certain market segment and basically shut it down, and then pick and choose winners and starting it back up. And this I find unconscionable, when bureaucrats who are completely unaccountable to anybody. You can't fire them. You don't know who hires them. They make up their own rules as they go. Basically, are running our lives. And I say, what should I say? They can't arrest us all. I don't want to say that. That's a quote from somebody else, because I'd hate to get arrested today.
Part of the problem is when you talk to public policy, there's a lot of this follow the science, but there is no the science. There's a lot of different sciences that have to be balanced and weighed and measured against each other. And so when you talk about following the science in any singular piece of science, you're gonna get things wrong because you're not actually paying attention to the world as it exists. You're paying attention to some utopian slice of it that you've created and isolated, and making decisions based upon that. And we pointed out here that, this mental health issues and the community distress, we pointed out that it was going to happen a year and a half ago when we all started. That was an inevitable consequence of this going on. So it's not like people didn't know. So we knew that there was going to have negative consequences of these kind of policies. And frankly, it's not surprising that mental health is deteriorating. Our communities are deteriorating. Our love of our fellow man, our humanity is deteriorating. We're looking at watch our windows, and you watch, smash and grabs, and crime is up, murders are up, and we wonder where it comes from. Like this dehumanization we've gone through the last almost 2 years now is clearly plays a role.
And just to remind people, the scientific method is about putting out a theory or a proposition and then trying to prove it wrong. That's been turned on its head, and scientists are now putting out a theory and saying this is correct and doing everything to quash anything that would prove it is wrong, and look only at evidence that supports their presupposed notion.
No.
Well, we discussed communities in crisis. We're going to go talk on here about California and its communities are in crisis. For the first time ever, Los Angeles and San Francisco at the same time lost population. Fewer people are moving to California, so we're actually, again, still continuing to lose population, and it's actually accelerated in the last year. So this disintegration, and this isn't just people moving, this is a disintegration of families and communities. Families are being torn apart. Communities are being torn apart. Organizations are being torn apart because people say, I can't live here anymore. I can't afford to live here, or I can't stand the political culture, whatever it is. These are families and communities getting ripped apart. And we don't talk about it that way. There's far too many people who are too comfortable with their fellow Californians leaving, saying,
I think we have a situation in California. I mean, we have a federal system where each state, to a certain extent, has control over its own destiny. I mean, we've got an omnipresent federal government that's minimizing that, but we still have an awful lot of the power, political power, residing at the state level and at the local level, for that matter. And to the extent that California is in the vanguard of change, of progressivism, or as John would say, regressivism, we have California being the state, along with New York and a few other states, that are the most prone to regulate, the most prone to mess with people's lives in a meddlesome way, the most Karen-like government in the country. And people are getting tired of Karen. People are saying, "Yeah, the heck with it. I'm gonna go to a state that is more respectful of individual liberty, more respectful of my right to earn a living, more respectful of live and let live."
Yeah.
Oddly enough, more respectful of diversity, which we claim we like here in California, but we don't.
We don't. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, San Francisco is very forgiving of everything except for Republicans. So. I agree with you, and it's I think probably we should talk about Portland in another show about what's going on there, because I think that's what California is starting to look like. Even though the mayor of Oakland, we talked about it on the last show, has decided to hire some cops as well as doing all the interventionist stuff they were doing. It's particularly egregious here because you have a governor leading the charge and a supermajority of regressives in the houses, and they're still sitting on this gold mine called Silicon Valley that's producing all the cash that allows them to be foolish. And if they screw around with it long enough with remote learning and all the rest of that, they're going to continue to lose the goose that laid the golden egg, and then they're going to have to do something about the problem. Until until they can't borrow enough paper, or have the the federal government pitch in to bail them out, like they're doing with the changes in the salt tax. It's I think it's just going to continue to grow south. I think there is some good news out there on the regulatory front, or on the personal freedom front, and it's one of the articles. I don't want to try to take over your job, James, but we did have a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel about a court victory at the Ninth Circuit, didn't
Yeah, we have some light at the end of the tunnel at the end of the show. So we coming
Okay.
down the pike. We do have some light at the end of the tunnel coming on. But I want to point out that California, despite all of its progressivism, we lead the country in poverty. And the progressivism has literally made everything worse. And yet we got blinders on. The vote blue no matter who crowd has blinders on and refuse to hold themselves accountable. They just refuse to do it. I mean, it's, if for most of us, if we make mistakes, we screwed that up. We're going to go back. We're going to try to fix what we can, but we're going to try to not make that mistake again. And here in California, it's like, well, we screwed that up. We made these mistakes. So let's double down and do some more.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the world, you'll look at leftist or socialist or progressive ideology. It's an ideology that is above all full of hubris. It's full of we are correct. We must make the world conform to our ideas. And if if we have to break eggs in the process, as Lenin famously said, you got to break eggs to make an omelet. And if you look at the Soviet Union, they went 4 decades before they finally imploded and finally figured out that, well, maybe capitalism is just a little bit okay also. Same way with China. Same way with Venezuela. They have not yet pulled out of the tailspin that they're in. They will hopefully eventually, but it takes a long time before the people who are most people are apolitical. They don't care about politics, or they wish they didn't have to care. But at some point, they get hungry enough and homeless enough, and their liberties are trampled upon enough, so that they say, "To hell with this. We're not going to cooperate anymore." That's what caused the downfall of the Soviet Union. That's what led to the Zhou Enlai capitalist revolution in China. That's what has always brought tyrannies out of control of the tyrants. The only thing that keeps a tyranny going is the willingness of the vast majority of the population to say, "I'll obey."
Yeah, there's a nice T-shirt making the rounds. They can't arrest us all, but they'll arrest the ringleaders. So I'm not a ringleader. I'm not. I'm too old and small to go to jail. So it's. The problem is that, we talk about how horrible things are, and there's a bunch of problems, and the world's going to hell in a handbasket and all the rest of that. Yet, even at a reduced quality of life, we're still, I do a gratitude journal every day. We still have tons and tons and tons of things to be thankful for. I'm not looking forward to the horrors of drastic change from the bureaucrats that we have running everything now to a little more freedom, because what typically happens is that the regressives who don't care, they say, as Richard pointed out, the ends justify the means, are usually win revolutions, at least initially, because they're willing to do anything to win. Whereas nice folks libertarians who, believe in letting people let live, and you can do whatever you want, don't win. So we're in for, I think, a lot of mess, and I know there's a few lights at the end of the tunnel. One of them, and I wish I would have sent it out. Maybe we'll do it. Let's discuss it another time. Is apparently Mr. Bloomberg has decided to spend a whole lot of money fighting teachers unions in the state of California, which sounds, non-Bloombergish to me. But I mean, if the people that control the purse strings of the regressives are looking at what's going on and willing to step up and make some changes, maybe there is hope. I don't know.
Yep. Well, in New Jersey, the Scrooges are running around. There's not much hope in New Jersey. Newark, New Jersey wants to regulate churches and other activity and other community groups feeding the homeless. You're sitting here on one hand.
They wanted to ban feeding the homeless by anybody other than the government. Unfortunately for Newark's political leaders, it made media, and they were embarrassed into saying, "Oh, well, never mind. We won't ban feeding the homeless. We'll just regulate it to death. We'll just say you have to get so many permits that it becomes impractical." It's a clear example of the government insisting upon having a monopoly and then totally messing it up. Haven't we learned from the fact that the post office is a monopoly and provides terrible service? DMV is a monopoly that provides terrible service. Education is largely a monopoly, certainly an oligopoly that has been inflating at a rate that is double or triple the rate of inflation for the last 20 or 30 years. Haven't we seen that medicine, largely a government monopoly or oligopoly, has also seen inflation that has been far in advance of the general economy? Government monopolies are dysfunctional, and a government monopoly on charity serves two bad purposes. One, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, provide services to the homeless or to the poor. And two, it makes it impossible for anybody else to step in, to the detriment of the poor.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Richard on this. And I was talking to my buddy Dwayne, who has ministered to the homeless for years and years and years. And I threw off some off-cuff, remark about spending more money. He said, "John, they don't need to spend any more money. They got plenty of money. What they have is, you know about the military-industrial complex, and you know about the educational complex that the colleges are in cahoots with the politicians and the banks and all the rest of that. But there is a huge industry, especially in the state of California now, and it sounds like they want to create one in Newark, around homelessness. There's all these NGOs and nonprofits that get grants. There's all these politicians that do the programs. There's all these taxes and the staff and all the rest of that. And so as any other government program, a crisis or an appearance of a crisis becomes an opportunity to create ever larger bureaucracy and ever greater layers, and hand power out and hand out favors. And so that's what's happening here. We throw a ton of money at homeless people in the state of California, and there's more of them all the time. So it's not throwing money into the hands of politicians to deal with it. There's many churches that do a magnificent job getting homeless people off the street. The 20% that you can never do anything with, they write them off. But the ones that are, borderline because they've had something in their life and they're transitional homelessness isn't a condition. It's what am I looking for? The word for it. It's a symptom. And so they're throwing money at the symptom, but there's all sorts of different kinds of homelessness, and that's just one of the problems in the state. And it's a symptom of ineffective mental health care, because the full-time homeless, probably 60% of them are mentally ill and do need some help. But just saying everybody homeless is the same. You've got maybe 20% that are transitional and could, with a little help and a little bootstrapping and some guidance and being held accountable, could get a job, because there's a lot of jobs open right now, let me tell you.
Yeah. And John, I don't want to cut you off, but we wanted to get to we want to have time to get to your little positive story and the end of it. But the whole point is there's a lot of money in homelessness, and it's not the homeless that get it. It's the service industry that, the industry that has been built around that is actually the issue. But recently here in Amador County Trade School has won a Supreme Court fight against California, allowing themselves to actually educate people without having those students to get a GED. Now, this is a horseshoe farm. These are teaching people how to horseshoe, how to put horseshoe. And so the state wanted to require them to have GEDs and high school diplomas. And it says none of that's relevant to putting a horseshoe on a horse. And so they finally got the courts to acknowledge that, this is dumb. This is just a regulation for regulation's sake. And it was actually a violation of the First Amendment of not just the school, but the students. The students have a right to learn how to put horseshoes on, and the state doesn't have the right to interfere.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think it was the Ninth Circuit, which is, headquartered in San Francisco and usually pretty lefty and always believes in the state. But, we have a real educational problem in this country, because, the diploma mills want to shove everybody into college because that way they take out the big student loans and then they can pay the big fees and the universities can expand and expand and expand and people can require greater and greater degrees to do things they don't need degrees for. Maybe this, is the turning point because you certainly don't need a high school diploma to learn how to do an enormous number of jobs that are open in this country that with a little training, a little technical training, if you can read, write, follow instructions, work hard, and do a little math, you should be able to, and without all these regulatory barriers, you would be able to make a darn good living and fill some of these open jobs. And I hope this is the start of a trend. It's a wonderful thing. Wonderful thing. Yeah.
Anything to add, Richard?
Well, yeah, no, I agree. I agree that John mentioned you don't need a high school degree to do a lot of these things. You certainly don't need a college education. And unfortunately, due to the way that we fund higher education, including trade schools, there's an awful lot of scam trade schools out there. But if we simply took away the federal funding, the cost of trade schools would go way down, and we would have a much more effective and functional system for training people to be effective and be able to make a good living in the trades.
Yeah, and well, John was talking about following instructions. There's a short little story here to end this. A professor, and I don't off the top of my head remember where he was, but he's a music professor, and in his syllabus, he put in a note to class that says, if you go to this locker, the first person to this locker, and gave the combination, and there's a surprise for you. There was $50 in a locker in his syllabus, and all you had to do was, as John says, follow the instructions and work a little hard. It's not even hard work. You just have to go to a locker and open a thing, and they could have won $50. At the end of the year, the money was still there. The lock hadn't been changed. All these highly educated students didn't bother to read the syllabus.
That's really more of a commentary on all of the legalese that we're faced with on a daily basis. When we look at downloading any app on our iPhone or any new program on our computer, we have to sign off and say, check a little box that said we've read 60 pages worth of legalese before they'll sign us up. Nobody reads that 60 pages of legalese. Likewise, the syllabi are now full of legalese. Nobody reads them either, and this is like a good proof of that.
Yeah, and I maybe it's time for them to cut some of the verbose language that I get sidetracked into on occasion, and keep it short and simple. And keep it simple, sweetheart. And again, life is all about reading those contracts, and I don't do it anymore. And I read one of them about halfway through, and it was indeed 30 pages. I read 15, and it basically gave the software company the right to live inside my computer and do whatever they wanted with the information they found, and give it to anybody they wanted to, no matter what I said later. Just by agreeing to use that software, I'd given up, all of my privacy.
And we give up all of our time. I want to thank you guys for being with me today. I want to thank you for watching. Have a Merry Christmas, and please remember to love everybody.
Happy New Year.
Yeah. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year's to you guys. And my high holy days tomorrow, winter solstice. And I'm going to practice like a good pagan and eat and be merry. And I hope that you guys do too.